In 1840, a skeptical doctor walked into one of England's most haunted houses, armed with pistols and determination to prove the ghost stories false. Less than 3 hours later, he was carried out screaming, in what he described as an agony of fear and terror, with no memory of what had reduced him to hysteria. His name was Dr. Edward Drury, and the house that broke him was Willington Mill. What happened that night? What did he see that could shatter a rational man's sanity? And more importantly, why did a respectable Quaker family endure 12 years of supernatural torment in that house before finally fleeing? This is the true story of the haunting of Willington Mill, one of the most thoroughly documented hauntings in Victorian England, witnessed by dozens of credible people, recorded in meticulous diary entries, and investigated by some of the earliest paranormal researchers in history. But here's the thing that makes this case truly unsettling. Despite all that documentation, despite all those witnesses, despite everything we know, we still don't know what actually haunted that house, or why it started, or why it stopped. By the end of this video, you'll understand why this haunting terrified Victorian England, and why, perhaps, it should still terrify us today. Willington was a small hamlet nestled in a deep valley between Newcastle-on-Tyne and North Shields in Northumberland, England. It wasn't much, just a parsonage, a handful of cottages, and a massive steam-powered flour mill that looked more like a factory than anything else. The mill was one of the first steam-powered corn mills in all of Europe, built in 1805 by a partnership between two families, the Unthanks and the Proctors. Next to the mill, but completely detached from it, stood the mill house, a square, Quaker-style building with 3 stories and an attic. Nothing about it looked haunted. Nothing about it suggested what was to come. In 1831, when Joseph Unthank retired after 25 years living in the mill house, he moved his family to Battle Hill Farm. That same year, a young man named Joseph Proctor Jr., son of the mill's co-owner, married Elizabeth Carr of Kendal. The newlyweds needed a home, and the mill house was perfect. Joseph Jr. was a devout Quaker, a man of integrity and honesty qualities, his religious sect valued above all else. He and Elizabeth moved into the mill house and soon filled it with children. Life was good. The mill business was thriving. Everything seemed perfectly ordinary. For 4 years, the Proctors lived peacefully in that house. And then, in January 1835, something changed. Begins, the nursemaid, was the first to notice. For about 2 months, she'd been hearing something strange while putting the children to bed. Footsteps, heavy footsteps, pacing back and forth in the room directly above the nursery, the attic room. At first, she said nothing. "What do you say? That you're hearing things?" But the footsteps continued night after night, the same measured pacing, back and forth. Finally, she told the Proctors. Joseph went upstairs to investigate. The door to the attic room had been nailed shut. The Unthanks had mysteriously boarded it up years ago, but the Proctors needed the space, so they'd unsealed it when they moved in. Joseph opened the door. The room was empty, completely empty. He scattered meal-fine flour all over the floor to see if anything would leave footprints. The next morning he checked. Not even a mouse had walked across that floor. But the nursemaid kept hearing the footsteps, and soon she wasn't the only one. This was when Joseph Proctor made a decision that would prove invaluable to history. Being a methodical, honest Quaker, he decided to keep a diary, a detailed record of everything that happened in his house. It's January 1835, and Joseph Proctor has just begun documenting one of the most prolific hauntings in British history. The footsteps were just the beginning. In February 1835, Joseph decided to consult his cousin, Joseph Unthank, the previous occupant. The conversation must have been awkward. Joseph mentioned the strange noises, the footsteps, the growing sense that something was off, and that's when Unthank revealed the bombshell. He told Joseph that the house, and particularly that attic room, was said to be haunted before they even moved in back in 1806. But, he insisted, nothing had happened during their 25 years there. Nothing at all. Joseph wrote in his diary that he wasn't sure he believed his cousin. Had the Unthanks really experienced nothing, or had they simply learned to live with it? We'll never know. But Joseph began researching. He made a note, half erased, indistinct, in his diary. An infirm old woman, the mother-in-law of R. Oxon, the builder of the premises, lived and died in the house, and after her death the haunting was attributed. The sentence ends there, unfinished. as if Joseph thought better of writing whatever came next. Some say this refers to the Willington witch, a woman named Mrs. Pepper who was allegedly put on trial for witchcraft in the 1660s. There were rumors that a cottage had stood on this spot before the mill house was built, rumors of a terrible crime, rumors of a priest who refused to hear a dying woman's confession, but these were just rumors, local folklore. Joseph couldn't verify any of it. Meanwhile, the haunting was escalating. The creak of what sounded exactly like Thomas Mann's water cart being dragged across the yard. Except when Mann investigated, the cart was still in its place. Voices. Mrs. Proctor called for the nursemaid one day, and a voice answered from the nursery in a tone too well known in the house. But when she went to check, the room was empty. The nursemaid wasn't even in the house. And then, in November 1835, something happened that must have chilled Joseph to his core. He wrote in his diary, "Two of the children in the house, one aged about 8, the other under 2 years, both saw, unknown to each other, an object which could not be real, and which went into the room where the apparition was afterwards seen and disappeared there." Or shouldn't have been real. But the most terrifying incident came in February 1836. Two of Mrs. Proctor's sisters came to visit and were given a 4-poster bed in one of the upstairs rooms. The first night, as they lay in bed, they felt something beneath them. The entire bed was lifted up, as Joseph described it in his diary, as if a man were underneath pushing it up with his back. On another night, the bed shook violently, and then they saw her, a female phantom, emerging from the wall at the head of the bed. She hovered over them, this gray-blue figure, semi-transparent, watching them. Both sisters saw her. Both sisters refused to ever spend another night in that house. By now, the haunting had become the talk of the neighborhood. The Proctors tried to keep it quiet. Joseph worried about the effect on his children, on his business. But stories spread. Strange stories. Thomas Mann, the mill foreman, lived nearby. One evening, he was walking past the house with his wife and daughter when they saw something in an upper window. A man, bareheaded, wearing a surplice, a religious garment worn by priests. He drifted back and forth past the window for 10 minutes, his feet level with the bottom of the window frame, as if he were floating. He was semi-transparent, they said, and bright as a star, radiating light. 4 people saw him, 4 credible witnesses. And the Proctors weren't even home that evening. The investigation news of the haunting spread far beyond Willington. In 1840, it reached a man named Dr. Cyril Edward Drury in Sunderland. Dr. Drury was a skeptic. He'd read about the supernatural in the writings of John Wesley, the famous Methodist preacher who'd experienced his own haunting at Epworth Vicarage. But Drury didn't believe in ghosts. He believed in rational explanations. When he heard about Willington Mill, he saw an opportunity. He wrote to Joseph Proctor and essentially invited himself to spend a night in the house. He would bring his dog and his pistols. He would get to the bottom of this nonsense. Joseph Proctor agreed, with one condition: no dog. The pistols were fine. On July 3, 1840, Dr. Edward Drury arrived at the mill house with a colleague, Thomas Hudson, a chemist from North Shields. The Proctors were supposed to be away, but Joseph had unexpectedly returned for business. He had dinner with the 2 investigators. One wonders what they talked about. Did Joseph try to warn them? Did Drury scoff? We know from later accounts that Drury and Hudson were confident. They double-checked the entire house, made sure all the doors and windows were secure. Only 4 people would be in the house that night: Drury, Hudson, Proctor, and Proctor's elderly servant. Satisfied that no one could be playing tricks, Drury and Hudson took up their post on the 3rd-floor landing, facing the most haunted rooms, and they waited. For hours, nothing happened. Hudson eventually dozed off in his chair. Drury kept watch, probably growing more confident with each passing minute. It was 11 p.m. when they first heard it. Footsteps, walking across the floor above them. Then came the knocking, and then, impossibly, a hollow cough. Drury was still rational, still convinced there must be an explanation. He took out his pocket watch, 10 minutes to 1 in the morning, and that's when his eyes fixed on the closet door. In a letter dated July 13, 1840, Drury described what happened next, and his exact words are chilling. I took up a note which I had accidentally dropped and began to read it, after which I took out my watch to ascertain the time and found that it wanted 10 minutes to 1. In taking my eyes from the watch, they became riveted upon a closet door, which I distinctly saw open, and also saw the figure of a female, attired in grayish garments, with the head inclined downwards, and one hand pressed upon the chest as if in pain, and the other, viz., the right hand, extended towards the floor, with the index finger pointing downwards. She seemed to be in pain, stumbling, bent over. Dr. Edward Drury, the rational skeptic, armed with pistols, began to scream. He charged at the figure. He tripped over Hudson. And then, nothing. The next thing Drury remembered, he was being carried downstairs in an agony of fear and terror. He had no memory of what happened after he charged the phantom. The experience had literally broken his mind. Later, Drury would write that the encounter had such ill effects on his health that he feared he might never recover. A skeptic walked into the house. A believer, a traumatized, broken believer, was carried out. After Drury's investigation, the haunting continued for 7 more years. Joseph Proctor's diary fills with incident after incident. Objects moved, sounds echoed through empty rooms. The children saw strange animals, a peculiar cat, an odd monkey. Edmund, the youngest, later claimed he saw disembodied white faces and a female apparition with hollow eye sockets. He was only 2 years old at the time. On one occasion, Joseph even claimed he saw his own image staring back at him. The family tried everything. They searched for rational explanations. Could it be the steam mill? Could the noise and vibrations from the machinery be causing auditory hallucinations? Could the tide in Willington Gut, the narrow stream nearby, create strange sounds? But none of it explained the apparitions. None of it explained 4 witnesses seeing a glowing priest. None of it explained beds levitating and figures emerging from walls. By 1847, Joseph Proctor had had enough. His children were growing up in this house. The phenomena were affecting them. Whatever his Quaker duty to truth and rationality, his duty to his family came first. The Proctors packed up and moved to North Shields and then to Tynemouth. And here's the interesting thing, at neither of those new homes did they experience any supernatural phenomena. Nothing, not a single incident. Whatever was haunting them, it wasn't following them, it was in the house. After the Proctors left, the Mill house was divided and occupied by 2 families. One was the Mann family, the same Manns who had seen the priest in the window. They knew the house's history, they experienced some strange events, but they stayed for 20 years. Later, the house was broken up into tenements. Workers at the mill continued to report paranormal activity. The house eventually fell into ruin and was torn down. But here's what's haunting about this case, pun intended. We have Joseph Proctor's diary. We have letters from Dr. Drury. We have testimony from dozens of credible witnesses. The Society for Psychical Research published a full account in their 1891 to 1892 journal, with additional information provided by Edmund Proctor, Joseph's son. All of this evidence, all of these witnesses, and we still don't know what was happening in that house. Perhaps the nursemaid was behind it. She was young, and there were famous cases like the Stockwell ghost and Cock Lane ghost where young girls caused mischief. But she left shortly after reporting the phenomena, and the haunting continued for years afterward. Could it have been the children? Poltergeist activity is often associated with young people. And the phenomena continued consistently, witnessed by adults who weren't easily fooled. Environmental factors? The railway viaduct nearby wasn't opened until 1840, 5 years after the haunting began. Though one wonders if the construction deep foundations, vibrations from digging, could have contributed to some of the noises. Some have pointed to the legends, the Willington witch, Mrs. Pepper, executed for witchcraft in the 1660s. The murdered worker, allegedly buried in the cellar during the house's construction. The dying woman whose confession was refused by a priest. But these are just stories, folklore. We have no documentary evidence for any of them. And then there's the most unsettling possibility of all, that something genuinely supernatural was in that house. That Joseph Proctor, his family, his guests, Dr. Edward Drury, Thomas Mann and his family, and dozens of other witnesses all saw something that defied rational explanation. The Proctors were Quakers, a religious group that emphasizes honesty and truth above all else. Joseph Proctor's diary has always been regarded as reliable because of this. He had nothing to gain from fabricating a haunting. In fact, he actively tried to suppress the rumors because they were bad for business. Dr. Drury was a skeptic who went into the house determined to debunk the haunting. He came out traumatized, his health affected, his skepticism shattered. Multiple witnesses, on multiple occasions, saw the same apparitions, the gray lady in pain, the glowing priest. What do we make of this? Here's the most important thing about the haunting of Willington Mill. It doesn't give us easy answers. We want ghost stories to have explanations. We want the hoax revealed, the trickery exposed, the rational explanation that lets us sleep soundly at night. Or, if we believe in the supernatural, we want dramatic confirmations, proof that ghosts are real, evidence we can point to and say, see, Willington Mill gives us neither. What it gives us is uncertainty, documented uncertainty, witnessed by credible people, recorded by honest men, investigated by skeptics, and still unexplained. Joseph Proctor's diary wasn't published until 1891, 40 years after the family left the house. His widow, Elizabeth, asked their son Edmund to wait until after her death before making it public. Edmund respected her wishes. Why the delay? Perhaps because she wanted to protect her family from ridicule. Perhaps because the memories were too painful. Perhaps because she knew that some questions can't be answered and some experiences can't be explained, and sometimes all you can do is document what happened and let others make of it what they will. In 1897, writer John Ingram suggested that the case might have inspired Edward Bulwer Lytton's famous supernatural story, The Haunted and the Haunters. Whether true or not, it shows the impact this haunting had on Victorian imagination. And it still impacts us today. As of 2012, the old mill, now a rope factory again, operating under the name Bryden Ropes, still has workers who report paranormal activity. The house is long gone, demolished, returned to earth, but the stories persist. So what was haunting Willington Mill? Was it the spirit of an old woman who died in the house? The ghost of the Willington witch cursing the land? A murdered worker, buried in secret? A dying woman, denied confession, unable to rest? Or was it something else entirely? Mass hallucination triggered by environmental factors? Infrasound from the mill, sleep paralysis, priming and suggestion turning normal sounds into supernatural experiences? The truth is, we don't know. We'll probably never know. And maybe that's what makes the haunting of Willington Mill so compelling, so terrifying. Not because we know what it was, but because we don't. Joseph Proctor was an honest man who documented extraordinary events. Dr. Edward Drury was a skeptic who came face to face with something that shattered his worldview. Dozens of witnesses, upstanding, credible people, saw things they couldn't explain. They all left us their testimony, their evidence, their truth as they experienced it. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, the haunting of Willington Mill reminds us of something fundamental about the human experience. There are things in this world we don't understand, things that resist explanation, things that exist in the space between what we know and what we fear. And sometimes, when you document those things carefully enough, thoroughly enough, honestly enough, they become even more mysterious. The mill house is gone now, torn down, forgotten by most. But the questions remain, and in the darkness of an old steam mill in Northumberland, if you listen carefully enough, maybe you can still hear the footsteps. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of Victorian England's most documented hauntings, make sure to like and subscribe. Let me know in the comments, do you think the haunting of Willington Mill was real? What's your theory? And remember, some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. Some are meant to haunt us. See you next time.